Hello, my loves. Tonight, I'm telling you the story of a woman who traveled to the edge of the Atlantic with a broken heart and an empty canvas, hoping to find her way back to the person she used to be before love unmade her. What she found instead was something she hadn't packed for. Because sometimes the most honest thing you've ever made isn't a painting. Sometimes it's the courage to let someone see you at the very bottom and stay anyway. Chapter 1: Arriving in Ash. The first thing the island gave me was smell. Salt and wild fennel and something underneath both of them that I couldn't name precisely. Older than either, earthier. The smell of stone that has been rained on for centuries and remembers every drop. I stood at the wooden gate of the estate with my single hard-shell case and my canvas roll under one arm, and I breathed it in before I did anything else. Before I looked up at the house. Before I took stock of where I was or what I had done to get here. I needed that moment. I needed to arrive in pieces rather than all at once. My name is Saoirse Malone. I am 31 years old, and I had spent the last 8 months becoming someone I did not especially recognize or like very much. And I had booked this retreat, 12 women, 2 weeks, a converted estate on the Galician coast, the way you do something when you have run out of other ideas. Not with hope, exactly, with something more like necessity. The last card in the hand. The estate was called Casa do Vento, House of Wind, and I had read about it on a forum thread at 2 a.m. in my studio in Dublin while not painting, which was how I spent most of my evenings now. Someone had written, "I arrived unable to make anything, and left with 12 canvases and 2 friendships I'll have the rest of my life." I had read that sentence 4 times. Then I had put my card details in before I could talk myself out of it. The gate was iron and old and open. A stone path led through a garden that had decided some years ago to govern itself. Roses expanding across the path edges, a fig tree dropping its September fruit onto the stones with a soft, decisive sound. Rosemary gone enormous and structural on both sides. The light was late afternoon gold, long and particular, the kind that makes everything look like a painting that is already finished and requires nothing further from you. The main house was 3 stories of pale stone with blue shutters thrown back against the walls. A wide terrace ran along its southern face, vine-covered, shadow-dappled, with a long wooden table already set for dinner. Mismatched plates, candles in glass jars, a board of cheese and bread and small dark olives, condensation on a pitcher of water. 5 women were distributing themselves around the table with the ease of people who had arrived at a good place and were entirely prepared to stay. One of them stood when she saw me come around the corner. "Saoirse!" She said my name exactly right, which almost made me cry, because I was jet-lagged and fragile and small, correct things were having a disproportionate effect on me. "I'm Ren. I got here 4 hours ago and I've eaten continuously since. Come sit down. They feed you the moment you walk in, which is categorically the correct approach to introducing strangers to each other." She had close-cropped hair and the kind of smile that makes you feel like a person you've been before and are pleased to have found again. I liked her immediately. I am good at liking honest things before I can construct reasons to be cautious about them. She introduced me around the table. Isadora, a sculptor from Porto, tall and angular with silver paint under her fingernails, and the settled composure of someone who has developed strong opinions about most things and is patient about sharing them. She worked large-scale abstract pieces in industrial materials, and she described her relationship to the work with a seriousness I recognized immediately as real rather than performed. Clem, mixed media, originally from Accra, now based in Amsterdam, whose work she described as portrait archaeology, extracting what photographs conceal rather than what they preserve. She was precise and armored in a way I placed immediately. The particular armor of a person who has learned to be careful and hasn't decided yet whether to stay careful here. Beatrice, barely 22, a fellowship award covering her place, still wearing the expression of someone who cannot entirely believe they are where they are. She spoke little, but watched everything with the enormous, absorbing attention of people who haven't yet learned to pretend they aren't affected by things. I liked her very much for this. Opaline and Franny were at the far end, already deep in a conversation about printmaking that had the warm, digressive quality of people who have been having the same conversation in different locations for several years. "Who else is coming?" I asked Wren quietly, accepting the wine she'd already poured for me. "2 more tomorrow morning, Idris and Yuki, both painters, and then the instructors." She reached for the bread. "There are 2. Tomas, who is apparently brilliant and warm and makes everyone feel capable, and then the lead instructor." Wren lowered her voice a fraction. Not conspiratorially exactly, just calibrating for the distance between us and the rest of the table. Isadora got here first, and apparently passed her on the path to the house. And she said, Wren glanced at Isadora, who was in a low conversation with Clem. She said she was not what she expected, which, from Isadora, I think is practically a standing ovation. I was about to ask what she meant when I heard the door behind me. She was standing in the doorway of the house. The light from inside framed her for a moment before she stepped through it. She was tall, dark-haired, wearing a linen shirt the color of old pewter, her hair pulled back in a practical knot that had several strands escaping it. There was cadmium orange on the inside of her left forearm, dried, apparently unnoticed or unremarkable. Her face was still in the way of people who have learned that stillness is its own kind of authority. Not blank, not cold, but composed, self-contained in the way of something that is full rather than empty. She moved her gaze across the terrace in one measured sweep. Not a greeting exactly, an assessment, patient, taking in the table and the candles and the assembled women with the attention of someone who finds everything worth knowing. And then her eyes arrived at me. They stayed for 1 second too long. Then she nodded at the table collectively and said, "Good evening," in a voice that was low and clear and carried itself without effort, and she walked back inside. "That," said Wren beside me, reaching for an olive with absolutely no change of expression, was our lead instructor, Mira Solano. I turned back to the table. I looked at my wine. I said nothing. And I felt the evening reorganize itself around a new center, the way iron filings reorganize themselves when you put a magnet down. I already knew I was going to have trouble sleeping. Chapter 2. The Folder. She was 33. Her full name was Mira Solano, and her biography was in the welcome folder left on the pillow of my room, which was small and white-walled with a view of the sea. Raised in Seville, art training in Barcelona, and then 4 years at the Rijksacademie in Amsterdam. First solo exhibition at 28, reviewed by a critic in El País as work that refuses to let you leave the room intact. A year as artist-in-residence at a private atelier in Lisbon, and then a professional quiet. She continued to paint, the folder said carefully, but had largely withdrawn from public exhibition. She was the lead instructor for the 2-week intensive. Her specialization, the folder noted, was figurative and landscape work, and what she called the architecture of looking, her term for the way a painting constructs a relationship between the viewer and the viewed, how the space between them is where the real content lives. I read that last paragraph twice. I set the folder on the nightstand. I looked at the white ceiling. Outside, the Atlantic wind moved through the fig tree in the garden, making a dry whispering sound. I had come here to paint, to remember why I had ever loved painting, to find whatever piece of myself had gone quiet in the last 8 months, since Dara, since the relationship that had ended not cleanly, but untidily, the way things end when one person has already started something new and the other is the last to know. I had come here to locate the woman who had loved paint and color and the long, particular silence of the studio, and who had somewhere in the process of loving a person badly become inaccessible to herself. I had not come here to develop feelings about a woman with cadmium orange on her arm. I have excellent skills at lying to myself. I have been cultivating them for 31 years. They did not help. Chapter 3. The Studio. The second instructor arrived on the morning train. Her name was Tomas, which she said immediately before anyone could attempt anything else. She was warm and fast, and had the particular gift of making pedagogy feel like a conversation you'd been wanting to have. She described her relationship to teaching as the most interesting collaboration in the world, the one between what someone already knows and what they can't see yet. She made Beatrice laugh at breakfast, a real and startled laugh that Beatrice then looked slightly surprised at herself for, which delighted everyone. The last 2 participants arrived before 10. Idris, a ceramicist from Lagos who had been wanting to try painting for years and had decided this was the push she needed, and Yuki, a watercolorist from Kyoto living in Berlin, who laughed at everything with the genuine unguardedness of someone who has decided the world is mostly worth laughing at. The studio was in the converted stables at the east end of the property. Vaulted stone ceilings, exposed oak beams, walls whitewashed to a geological thickness. North-facing skylights brought in the particular clean, cool light that painters build their lives around. The wooden floors were stained in decades of pigment, color laid down in layers that looked almost intentional, almost like geological record. The smell of linseed and turpentine and old wood and accumulated time, the smell of hundreds of concentrated hours by people who cared very much about what they were doing. Something opened in my chest when I walked in. Something that had been shut for 8 months, pressed flat against itself until it had nearly stopped trying. Not fully open, the beginning of open, the first small creak of a door, long unused. Tomas ran the morning session with cheerful precision. Materials, philosophy, the retreat's approach. Be in the body. Use the whole arm. Paint what you feel about what you see, rather than what you think you see. Things I had heard in other studios and which she delivered with the freshness of someone presenting a personal discovery. I sketched while she talked, loose marks that didn't commit to any particular thing, just keeping the hand moving. Mira stood at the far side of the studio and said nothing. She moved through the space occasionally, stopping briefly to look at someone's work and then continuing. She spoke once in the entire first session, quietly to Idris, and I didn't catch the words. She was a presence that didn't demand attention, but collected it, the way deep water at the edge of a bright landscape pulls the eye without being loud about it. I did not look at her. I did not look at her the way you don't look at something that is actively pulling at you, with the real-time awareness of each moment you're succeeding, which is its own form of constant attention. A process of non-looking that requires more concentration than looking would. I was working on something that was trying to become a figure, a woman mid-turn, not quite resolved, when I heard footsteps. The studio floor carried sound clearly, and her walk had a particular rhythm, unhurried and deliberate, each step exactly where it was placed. She stopped behind me. I felt it before she spoke, the specific quality of stillness that arrived alongside her. "You're fighting it," she said. Her voice in the studio was different from the terrace the night before, more contained, but with the same quality of precision, like something calibrated for accuracy rather than warmth. "Fighting what?" "The line." She indicated, without touching the page, a mark in the upper right. "You started something and then corrected it before it committed. That first mark..." A pause. "You were right. And then you panicked and made it polite." I looked at the drawing. She was completely correct. I had made a fast, instinctive mark, and then immediately, without thinking, smudged it and redirected, and what was left was technically tidier and completely without life. "I'm out of practice," I said. "You're afraid," she said, with no cruelty in it, the kind of directness that doesn't aim for you, but doesn't bother avoiding you either. And then she moved on around the studio. I sat with my tidy, lifeless correction and felt, with a disproportionate intensity that embarrassed me, as though I might cry. That evening, Wren quietly refilled my wine at the dinner table before I reached for the bottle, which I was beginning to understand was her primary language of care. "She said something equally precise to Isadora this afternoon," Wren said. "And Isadora has a Sao Paulo gallery show in November." "That's reassuring." "It would be more reassuring if Isadora hadn't come to find me afterward to ask what I thought she meant." Wren ate an olive. "She's very direct." "She is." "Tomas told me a little about her while we were putting away the lunch things. She used to show quite a lot. Was very celebrated, apparently, 5 or 6 years ago. And then something happened. Nobody knows exactly what, not even Tomas. But she stopped exhibiting. She still paints constantly, privately. Tomas says she teaches because it keeps her close to work she can't show." I thought about this, about Mira at the edge of the studio, watching each of us with those patient, steady eyes, watching the way people moved when they thought they weren't observed. "She already saw what was wrong with mine," I said, "in 10 minutes. "Congratulations," Wren said warmly. "I think that means she's actually paying attention to you." I looked at the candle flame and said nothing, because I was afraid of exactly that. Chapter 4. What the Body Carries. The days at Casa de Vento had a rhythm that felt medicinal from the beginning. Mornings where the Atlantic light moved through its transformations, pewter to silver to the flat, bright clarity of full day. And the breakfast table was generous and unhurried, with its bread and its cold butter and its tiny cups of espresso. Studio work from 9 to noon, a long lunch that ran the way lunch ran here, not as refueling but as occupation. Afternoon heat requiring the meal to stretch into it. More studio time after, or walks along the clifftop path where the sea spread out below like hammered tin. Critique sessions in the long room with the good north light, where Mira arranged everyone's work on the walls and stood in front of it in complete silence for what felt like geological stretches of time before she said a word. She was not kind in critiques. She was not unkind. She was precise. She spoke with the care of someone who had found that the most useful thing is the right word, and that anything additional dilutes. She could make one observation that reframed an entire piece of work, And she did it without performance, without theater, simply setting the thing in front of you and letting you look. On the third day, she stopped in front of mine. I had been working on a figurative study, a figure bent low, the composition built around the diagonal of her spine and the space it created between her and the implied floor. The palette was mostly cool, grays and pale blue in the lower portion, with a single warm amber at the far right edge that I had put in instinctively and then almost painted over because it felt like reaching for something I wasn't sure I was allowed to reach for. Mira was silent in front of it for a very long time. Long enough that I felt the attention of the rest of the group shift. Long enough that I had already prepared, in my head, the professional and neutral response to whatever critique was coming. The one that demonstrates you are taking this seriously and not personally, which is the lie you learn to tell early in studio training. "The emotional weight lives here," she said at last. She touched the air near the lower left corner, the shadowed area. "That's where this painting breathes. That's where the feeling is." She indicated the center. "But you keep trying to place it here. You keep correcting toward the center because the center is where you've been told things belong." A pause. "What are you feeling when you paint this?" she asked. The question was so direct and so completely unexpected that I had 0 seconds to construct anything professional and had to simply answer. "Like I'm trying to hold something together that wants to fall apart," I said. And then the room was quiet, and my face was warm, and she was looking at me, not at the canvas, but at me, for a moment, with those deep, complicated eyes. "Put that in the lower left corner," she said quietly, "where you felt it." The critique moved on, but I stood in front of my canvas for a long time afterward, looking at the apologetic, tentative shadow I had put there and then tried to overwrite. And I felt something shift in me with a small but unmistakable quality, like a joint finding its proper alignment after a long time out of place. The moment with her hand happened on the 5th day. We were working on an extended exercise, a still life arrangement, a collection of objects whose relationship with each other was complicated. A bottle, draped cloth, a ceramic bowl, an orange. Mira's instruction was to approach it as landscape, to treat the space between the objects as active as the objects themselves, to work standing, the whole arm moving, the shoulder doing the work rather than the wrist. I understood the instruction completely. The gap between understanding and execution was the wide, difficult country I had been living in for 8 months. I kept collapsing at the elbow. There was a habit there that ran deep, the vocabulary of caution, the mark-making of someone who is always half apologizing for the space they take up. She stopped behind me. I had learned not to turn. I waited. "You're collapsing at the elbow," she said. "I know, I keep..." Again. I extended my arm, made a stroke, felt the elbow fold inward at the end of it, the instinct toward containment impossible to override through willpower alone. "May I?" she asked. "Yes," I said. Her hand closed around my wrist. Just that. Her fingers wrapping lightly around the bones of my wrist. No real pressure, barely a weight, more a presence than a grip. My entire nervous system registered it in a single flooding moment that moved from my wrist all the way up through my shoulder and into my chest and the back of my neck. I had to remember, with careful deliberateness, that breathing was something I had been doing successfully for 31 years, and there was no reason to stop now. She adjusted the angle. Slowly, without yanking my arm into position, moving it the way you would move something you didn't want to damage. She brought my arm out to its full extension, the shoulder opening, the elbow traveling outward rather than curling in. I felt the shift in leverage through all the muscles I had been unconsciously shortening. "There," she said. "Feel the difference?" I nodded. Words were not reliably available. She didn't release my wrist. She stepped slightly closer. I could feel the warmth of her alongside my arm, the particular heat that bodies carry in close air. And her other hand came to rest very lightly on my shoulder, not gripping, just present, indicating the way you might put your hand on someone's shoulder to help them locate where a movement originates. She guided a stroke, long and clean, from the upper left of the canvas across to the lower right, a diagonal that covered the whole surface with real commitment. She was barely touching the brush. My arm was making the mark, my shoulder doing what she was asking. But her presence changed something as it happened. Something loosened that had been bracing against itself. Something released that I hadn't known was held. The stroke was the truest mark I had put on a canvas in months. And it happened because someone had their hand on my wrist and their warmth at my shoulder, and I had, briefly, stopped apologizing for the space my body needed to make something. "That," she said, and her voice was close enough that I felt it as much as heard it. "That is what the shoulder is for." She released my wrist and moved back. The absence of her hand had a quality as present as the hand itself had been. I made another stroke. The same diagonal. My arm now carrying the memory of the correct angle, the shoulder doing its work without being told. Not as clean as the guided stroke, but it had something in it. Breath, intention, a body that had stopped apologizing. "Better," she said, from somewhere behind me, and continued. Isadora, at the easel to my left, had very conspicuously not been painting during any of this. She caught my eye when I glanced sideways. She raised one single, eloquent eyebrow. Then she turned back to her canvas with an expression of exaggerated innocence and made a large, sweeping, technically redundant mark across the center of it. I turned back to my work and did not look at her, and felt my face doing something I had no control over whatsoever. Chapter 5. The Terrace at Midnight. That night I sat on the terrace after everyone had gone inside, long after the dinner things were cleared and the candle jars had burned to their wicks. I looked at the dark Atlantic and had a long, honest, very uncomfortable conversation with myself. I laid out the facts with the thoroughness they deserved. I had been here 5 days. She was my instructor. She was composed in a way I was clearly not, and probably did not spend her evenings on terraces wrestling with anything at all. The retreat was 9 days from ending. The world was very large. It was a specific kind of manufactured drama to decide that the first person you developed feelings for after a bad heartbreak was the most significant person you had encountered in years. I was completely persuasive. I believed none of it. She found me there at nearly midnight. The door behind me opened, and I turned and she was standing in it. White linen now, her hair down, which I had not seen before. Down. It had a slight wave in it that reached her collarbones, and she looked for one brief, unguarded moment before I could organize my face like a slightly different version of herself. More present somehow. Less defended. She was holding a bottle of white wine and 2 glasses, and she set them on the table without asking or explaining, and sat across from me. The table was small. The chairs were closer than they'd been at dinner. "You were painting after dinner," she said. not a question. How did you know? You have raw umber on your left wrist, she indicated briefly. I looked down. She was right. She poured the wine, pushed one glass toward me. Outside, the fennel in the garden was making its dry, whispering sound in the sea wind. The Atlantic below the cliff was doing its low, patient, enormous thing. I destroyed a painting once, she said, without preamble. The same directness she used in the studio applied to something personal. Completely destroyed it. Put a palette knife through the canvas in 3 places. I set my glass down. On purpose? Entirely on purpose. She looked at the wine. It was the best thing I had made at that point. That was precisely the problem. How is that the problem? Because it was honest. She said the word with precision, as if it were a technical term. I had painted something true, not planned, not constructed. It came out of me without my permission, essentially. And when I saw it finished, I understood what I'd done. I panicked. A pause. I was 26. I was in Lisbon. I thought that if anyone saw that painting, they would know something about me that I wasn't ready to have known. What happened to it? I burned it, she said simply. In the courtyard of the studio. It took longer than I expected. Canvas and linen hold on to themselves. And you've regretted it? I've thought about it many times, whether it was as good as I thought, or whether I only believed it was good because it terrified me. A pause. I think it was good. I think I burned good work because I was 26 and afraid, and couldn't distinguish between the vulnerability of honesty and the danger of exposure. She looked at me. That confusion resolves eventually. Does it? She looked at me with her measuring quality, but with something underneath the measurement that I was only beginning to be able to see. Care, I thought, the kind that doesn't announce itself. You're not painting from fear, she said. I want to say that clearly. Whatever you think is happening when you stand in front of your canvas, whatever reason you have for the elbow collapsing and the correcting and the painting over what is true, it isn't fear. You came here afraid, but you're not painting from it. A beat. You're painting from grief, which is an entirely different animal. Something in my throat did something complicated. I looked at the table. Grief wants to be seen, she said. Fear wants to hide. Your paintings keep reaching for visibility in the lower left corner, and then you cover it up. But the reaching is still there. The grief is still there. You don't have to put it in deliberately. It already is. You just need to stop being polite about it. The wind moved in the fennel. Somewhere below the cliff, the sea. A distant sound, a boat's light moving slowly across the black water. I had a bad ending, I said after a moment, to a relationship that had been good. She left not cleanly, the way you leave when you've both tried and it isn't working, but the other way. The way you leave when you've already started something else and the other person is last to know. I stopped. And the worst part wasn't the relationship. My work had already been going quiet before that. And when your work goes silent, when you sit in front of a canvas and feel nothing, not pain, just nothing, just absence, it's like losing the language you think in. She was very still. Yes, she said quietly. I know what that is. I looked at her. The work going silent, she said. I know exactly what that is. She was looking at the table. There was someone in Lisbon when I was still showing, someone I painted, a portrait, the most honest work I had made to that point. And she didn't use it maliciously, I don't think, but she used it. Things I had put in the painting, things that were private, became known in ways that I hadn't consented to. She paused. After that, making something honest felt dangerous. And when the work stops feeling safe, it stops feeling possible. How long? Almost 3 years, she said, before it began to come back. What brought it back? She was quiet for a moment. I started teaching. It kept me in contact with work without requiring me to expose my own. She looked at me. It's helped, and it's also a specific kind of loneliness. I looked at her. Teaching instead of showing. Being near it without being in it. Something moved in her expression, a real acknowledgement, a thing noted. Yes, that. We sat with the quiet of that, the Atlantic and the fennel and the last candle on the table between us, and it was one of the most comfortable silences I had ever been inside, which was precisely what frightened me. Whatever it was before you came here, she said at last, carefully. Don't let it convince you that you can't do this anymore. The lower left corner of that canvas today, that proves otherwise. Grief and beauty, I said after a moment. They've always been made of the same material. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she stood, taking her glass. Sleep, she said. The morning light is exceptional tomorrow. I want everyone in the studio early. She went inside. I sat for another 20 minutes in the aftermath of the conversation, in the way you sit in a room after something significant has happened in it, while the air still holds the shape of what was said. Chapter 6. Pattern. After that, something shifted between us, not obviously. She was the same in the studio, in critiques, at the group table, but in the specific way a light source shifts when a cloud moves. Same room, same objects, everything appearing slightly different. She stopped behind me more often when I was painting. I was fairly sure this was real and not imagined because Isadora had independently noticed and mentioned it with characteristic directness. She circles back to you, Isadora said one morning at the sink, rinsing brushes, her voice entirely conversational. I have been watching the pattern. She has a route. Everyone gets their time, and then she comes back to you. Every circuit. She's correcting my technique. I have objectively worse technique, Isadora said serenely. She has corrected me twice this week, both times in words, about 30 seconds each. She held a brush up to the skylight. She has not stood behind you for 40 seconds saying nothing. I am not making a judgment, Isadora said. I am reporting an observation. Even if you're right, she added, it doesn't change anything. She's the instructor. We leave in 8 days. The world continues after 8 days. I believe it has roads. Isadora set her clean brush aside. Someone is working very hard not to feel something they feel. You are the thing they feel it about. That matters, even if you haven't decided what to do with it. I finished cleaning my brushes in silence. For what it's worth, Isadora added, Ren agrees with me. You've been discussing this. We've been observing and comparing notes, Isadora said, with a dignity entirely undermined by the satisfied expression she was wearing. These are completely different activities. The figure who complicated things, or more precisely, who sharpened the edges of things already complicated, was Clem. She was talented. Her work was extraordinary, intricate and technically precise, and she generated genuine admiration. But she moved through the retreat with a specific kind of focus that had a constructed quality to it. She sought Mira out frequently, with questions about materials, extended feedback requests, conversational angles at mealtimes that felt engineered in advance. Mira was consistent with her, professional, attentive, precise. She spent real time on Clem's work and critiques, and her observations were genuinely engaged. But she didn't seek Clem out. She responded when found. I watched this and felt things I was not particularly proud of. A tightening when they stood close over Clem's canvas. A specific quality of unhappiness when I heard Clem's laugh from the other end of the terrace. An embarrassing feeling I was not going to dignify with extended description because it was jealousy, and jealousy is embarrassing, and made worse by the fact that I had no claim on anything at all. I mentioned none of this to anyone. Wren mentioned it anyway. Clem had her cornered in the gallery room for nearly an hour yesterday afternoon, Wren said one evening, sitting beside me on the stone wall at the edge of the garden with 2 glasses of wine she'd materialized from somewhere. I didn't notice, I said. She looked at me. I briefly noticed, I corrected. It's allowed. You're not required to be serene about this. She drank her wine. It's genuinely uncomfortable to watch someone you have feelings for be attentively sought out by someone very capable, even when you also believe, and I think you do believe, that nothing is happening. Is nothing happening? I watch faces, Wren said. When she's genuinely engaged with something, the right side of her mouth changes, just slightly, the corner. When she was listening to Clem this afternoon, it didn't change. A pause. When she corrected your elbow the other day, it did. I looked out at the darkening sea. It's the last week, I said, and I'm still... I stopped. What if I'm just transferring? Taking all the feeling from the last thing and aiming it at whatever is close? Is she close? Wren asked. No. She's the most inconvenient thing here. Wren drank her wine with the expression of someone whose hypothesis has been confirmed. That, she said, is a very good sign. Chapter 7. Lisbon. The excursion to Lisbon was on Wednesday. I had a feeling about the day I could not have explained, the kind that lives in the body rather than the mind, a weather sense rather than a calculation. The train was full with the morning crowd, and our group distributed itself through the carriages in the loose way of people who have been together long enough to not need to sit in a cluster. Wren and Isadora found facing seats and colonized the table between them. Beatrice sat with Yuki near the door. Tomas had papers to review. Idris had a book and headphones. Opaline and Franny settled into the comfortable continuation of their ongoing printmaking discourse. I found a window seat. Mira was across the aisle, 1 row forward. I could see the line of her jaw if I turned my head the correct, precise fraction. I told myself I was not going to turn my head. I turned my head approximately every 3 minutes for the first half of the journey. She was reading. Dense, unfashionable things. Art theory, philosophy, a translation of poetry I couldn't identify from the spine. The morning light came through the window and moved across her face as the landscape shifted. Eucalyptus giving way to vineyards, then the pale gold of the Tagus Plain. I watched the light on her the way I watched light on things I might want to paint, which was a thought I then had to put firmly away. The train curved on a long bend and the light shifted sharply, and she turned her head. She was looking directly at me. Neither of us moved for a moment. She looked back at her book. I looked out at the Tagus appearing silver and enormous, and felt the weather sense intensify, which I continued to tell myself was nothing. We scattered at the central square with instructions to reconvene at a gallery on the Chiato at 2. I walked alone into the Alfama, and I was glad of it. Those narrow lanes and their tile work and their cats, and the particular way the light fell through the close-built streets at steep angles. I found a stone step on a south-facing street that looked out over the rooftops to the river. I bought a custard tart from a bakery on the corner and ate it there and did nothing for 20 minutes, not thinking about the retreat or my ex or the 8 months before or what came after. Just the tart, which was very good, and the river, which was silver and slow and extraordinarily patient. "The 1-2 streets over makes it better," said a voice beside me. "The custard is denser." Mira was standing at the top of the step with a small paper cup of espresso. She was looking at the river with the expression of someone confirming that a place still matches their memory of it. "Are you following me?" I asked. "I come here every time I'm in Lisbon. This step. I've been coming here for 8 years. She looked at the view. "Do you mind if I sit?" "Sit down," I said. She sat. Not close, not deliberately distant. The space of 2 people who are being careful. The city went about itself below us, unhurried, a tram bell in a nearby street, the sound of someone whistling in the building above. "How are you finding the week?" she asked. "Not the work, the experience." The particular quality of sitting side by side, both facing the same view, made it easier to be direct. "I was very closed when I arrived," I said. "I told you about the relationship, but there was more. I had spent 18 months doing commercial work, commissions, client briefs, deadlines, technically fine, nothing of me in it. And somewhere in that I lost the thread of why I ever wanted to make anything. Not just the ability, the desire. The canvas stopped meaning anything." She was listening, still not interrupting. "I came here because I didn't know what else to do," I said. "I needed to be in a room that smelled like paint. I needed to be around other women who take it seriously. I needed to remember that I once took it seriously." "You take it seriously now," she said. "I'm beginning to remember how." A silence, the good kind. "I know what that is," she said, and there was a quality in her voice I recognized from the terrace, the careful choosing. Not as metaphor, the specific despair of sitting in front of a canvas and feeling nothing, not frustration, just absence. "After the burning," I said. "After the burning." She was quiet for a moment. "It lasted nearly 3 years. I tried to paint through it, and I couldn't. I tried to not paint, and that was worse. Eventually it came back, slowly, like feeling returning to a limb that's gone numb. Pins and needles first. Not pleasant, but real." "That's encouraging." "It's meant to be." The faintest shift at the corner of her mouth. "Though I know it doesn't feel like much when you're inside the numb." My phone buzzed. Ren. Gallery in 20. "Isadora is having a moment in front of something large. Send backup." I held up the screen. She looked at it, and the shift in her expression completed itself. A genuine, warm thing that I had not seen at full intensity before, and that did something considerable to my chest. "We should walk," she said, standing, and extended her hand to help me up from the step. I took it. She pulled me upright and released it, and we walked side by side through the Alfama, downhill through lanes where buildings leaned toward each other, and her shoulder brushed mine twice on a tight corner, and each time, neither of us moved away. Chapter 8. The Gallery. The gallery was a converted chapel near the river. Long, whitewashed rooms, good light, 3 decades of contemporary women painters from the peninsula and beyond. Work that had been curated with real thought about dialogue, how each piece spoke to its neighbors, how the rooms built on each other. We moved through it loosely, the group orbiting and separating by attention. Isadora had found her large canvas in the first room and was in the serious technical conversation she'd apparently required backup for, which Wren was providing gamely. Beatrice stood alone in front of a small portrait of an old woman and went entirely still in the way of young people being quietly struck by something true. Tomas and Yuki moved through the third room together, Tomas narrating things in her warm, specific way. I stopped in the second room in front of a painting that held me mid-stride, medium-sized, intimate. 2 women in a kitchen, not looking at each other, one at the window, one at the table, both with their hands occupied, both in the particular early morning state of people who are familiar enough with each other not to require performance. The light was the specific quality of 8 in the morning in a room that faces east. The content of the painting was entirely in the ordinariness of the scene and in the complete ease of 2 bodies in the same space without tension. I stood there for a while not analyzing it, just receiving it. "Do you know why it works?" Mira said very quietly beside me. I hadn't heard her approach. She was close, the room being narrow, both of us at the optimal viewing distance from the canvas. "Because nothing is happening," I said. "Nothing is being demonstrated. It's just 2 people who have the right to be in the same room without explaining themselves." A pause. "Yes," she said. She painted the ordinary truth of it, not what love looks like from the outside, what it feels like from the inside, on a Tuesday morning. Quietly, the most charged thing in a composition is often what isn't there, the space that doesn't need to justify itself. I kept my eyes on the painting. I was aware of her shoulder near mine, the warmth of her in the quiet gallery room. "The painting is complete," she said, because she stopped before she over-explained it. I didn't say what I wanted to say, which was that I understood exactly what she meant, and that it applied to more than the painting. We rejoined the group near the exit as the afternoon light came through the tall windows at a long, amber angle, making the white walls honey-colored and warm. I had stopped near the door. There was a small piece I'd missed on the way in, mounted simply in a plain wooden frame. 2 hands in charcoal, barely a study. The fingers of one hand just reaching toward the fingers of another, not quite touching. The space between them where the whole piece lived. I was standing in front of it when I became aware, with the particular awareness of someone whose nervous system has been learning to read a specific presence for a week, that I was no longer alone in the room. And then that awareness shifted. The man near the far window had been there for some time. His stillness had the wrong quality. Not the stillness of someone absorbed by art, but the stillness of someone who has been watching and does not want to be noticed watching. His gaze was on me with a focused and specific quality that sent a cold line of recognition down my spine. I moved toward the door. He moved at the same moment. What followed has a fragmented quality in memory, sensation in pieces rather than sequential film. A hand on my arm, tight, finding exactly the pressure point it intended. A service door I hadn't seen, flush with the wall, painted the same. Cold air and the smell of a back alley, bins and wet stone. My canvas roll strap cutting into my shoulder as I pulled against the movement. my own voice making sounds I heard from a slight remove, as if they belonged to someone else's emergency. There were two of them. They moved with an efficiency that was more frightening than heat would have been. Organized. The terrible logic of preparation. And underneath the adrenaline and the sound of my own blood in my ears, one clear and entirely useless thought. This was planned. And I was the plan. And I did not understand why, which was the worst part. Chapter 9. The Alley. Wren told me Mira's side of it afterward, in pieces as she had assembled it from what Mira said during the hours that followed. Wren had counted at the gallery exit. She said it was instinct, the way people with responsible attention do when in charge of a group, even when not formally in charge. She'd counted and come up one short and said to the group, flatly, "Where's Saoirse?" Mira had gone still. Not her usual stillness, not the controlled studio stillness. This was something short-circuiting the composure at the source. And then she had moved, back through the gallery door, Wren and Isadora behind her. When the room was empty and the side door found standing ajar, something changed in Mira that Wren said she could not fully articulate. The composed, precise instructor she had known for 10 days was not there. What was in her place was someone who had made a decision and was moving on it with everything available. She spoke to gallery staff. She spoke to people in the street. She had, Wren said, a specific quality of voice when she needed something immediately. Quiet, authoritative, entirely certain, communicating that the alternative to cooperation was something you did not want to be responsible for. People responded to it. Isadora called the police. Tomas gathered the rest of the group. Wren stayed with Mira and said that in the 12 minutes between the gallery and the back lane, Mira did not run. She walked, fast, very fast, making directional decisions with the speed of someone who trusts their own judgment absolutely. There was a vehicle. Wren stood at the lane entrance. She couldn't hear what Mira said. She heard only the quality of her voice. Low, specific, certain. And after less than 2 minutes, the door opened. I don't remember getting out. I remember the lane, its smell, its particular gray light. I remember a voice, recognizing it in a way that went below the rational, bodily, the kind of recognition that bypasses everything and simply pulls you toward it, saying my name. Not asking, saying. I moved toward it before I had fully processed that it was real. She caught me. My legs stopped their structural function and she was there, both arms around me, and we were on the ground together, her on her knees, and she was holding on with a tightness that was nothing like the studio. Not professional, not measured. Nothing like the careful and calibrated contact I had known from her. Her arms were shaking. That is what I remember with the most clarity. Through my own shock, through shock's specific quality of making everything feel like it's happening to someone nearby, I felt that her arms were shaking. Mira Solano, whose composure I had spent 10 days watching as something architectural and structural, was shaking while she held me in a back lane in Lisbon. I have you, she said, very quietly, into my hair. I have you. I have you. 3 times, like a promise being made out loud, because the saying of it makes it true. Chapter 10. The Hotel Room. There were police and a hospital, bruising on my arm, a cut on my palm from the lane wall, and the administrative misery of official processes in a foreign city. At some point, someone tried to take me from Mira to examine my arm, and she looked at them with an expression that was professionally courteous and completely immovable, and they reconsidered their approach. The men were known to local authorities, not for this specifically, but for related activities in a family matter of transnational complexity. I shared physical characteristics with someone else's daughter. A case of mistaken identity established relatively quickly by a police officer who delivered this information with the steady, matter-of-factness of someone for whom strange things are professional rather than exceptional. Ren arrived at the hospital and held me for a long time without speaking, which was exactly right, and which made me understand with the particular clarity that comes after terror how much I had come to love her in 10 days. The group was housed in a hotel near the hospital. 2 rooms of 4, everyone accounted for. Tomas managed the logistics with characteristic warm efficiency. The group was quiet in the gentle way of people who have collectively had a serious fright and are processing it together without requiring conversation. Ren fell asleep within an hour with the unself-conscious ease of someone who trusts that the worst has passed. I lay in the dark, listening to Lisbon outside the window, and felt the specific residue of adrenaline, the shaking that arrives when the emergency systems power down and the body doesn't know how to stop running them. The knock came at nearly 1 in the morning. She was in the same clothes from the gallery. Her hair had partially come down from the knot. She looked reduced in a way I couldn't precisely identify. Not undone, not distressed in any visible, quantifiable way, but the professional layering had come off somewhere in the evening's machinery, and what remained was closer, more immediate, more her. Her eyes, when she looked at me, were the most open I had ever seen them. "I couldn't sleep," she said. Just that, simply. More personal than anything she had said to me with craft or deliberation, because it was offered without either. "Come in," I said. She came in. I pulled the desk chair close to the bed, and she sat in it, and I sat on the bed's edge, and the lamp between us made a small, warm circle in the dark room. "Your arm," she said. "It'll bruise. Nothing structural." "Saoirse." I looked at her. "You were shaking," I said. "In the lane. Your arms were shaking." A long pause, the kind where I could see her deciding whether to acknowledge a thing. "Yes," she said. "You found the van. You got me out. And you were shaking." I was terrified, simply, without performance. I am usually very good at remaining functional under pressure. I couldn't. I could only... She stopped, started again. I kept thinking that I should have counted at the exit, that it was my responsibility, that I had been distracted, and you were... She stopped again. "Mira," I said gently, "it wasn't your fault." "I know it wasn't my fault," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "That isn't why it felt the way it did." The lamp, Ren's slow breathing, the city outside. "Tell me," I said. She looked at her hands. "Saoirse," she said. My name in her voice was a different thing every time, and this time it had weight and warmth and something underneath the warmth that she was working toward. "I know," I said. "I've been trying," she exhaled. "Since you arrived, I have been very deliberately trying to be what I am supposed to be here, because I have a responsibility to this group and to the work, and because I know what it is to confuse the intensity of a creative environment with something larger. And I had promised myself after Lisbon that I would be more careful about those confusions. But, I said, but you are not a confusion. She looked up and there was nothing guarded left in her eyes. Whatever she had been keeping behind the composure had come off in the lane, or in the hospital, or in the 12 minutes between the gallery and the van, and she had not put it back. What I feel when I look at your work, and what I feel when I look at you, I have not been confused about it. I have been afraid of it. A pause, which is different. I moved from the bed's edge. I crossed the small space and crouched in front of her chair so we were level, and I put my unbandaged hand on her knee. I have been falling in love with you, I said, since the first evening when you stood in the doorway for 5 seconds and looked at me and then went back inside. Her breath changed. I have been extremely thorough in constructing arguments against it, I said. None of them worked. Not one. Her hand came up and held my face, the same hand that had closed around my wrist in the studio and changed the angle of a stroke and changed something else I was still in the process of understanding. Her thumb moved along my cheekbone. I'm sorry it took this, she said softly. The lane, all of it. I'm sorry it took a disaster to make me stop pretending. Don't be, I said. We're here now. She kissed me. It was slow and certain and entirely itself, not urgent, not proving anything, not overcoming anything. The kiss of something that knows what it is and doesn't need to rush because it isn't performing. Her thumb moved against my cheekbone, and I made a small sound, and she pressed her forehead to mine in the after of it, and we stayed there in the lamplight, breathing, the city outside, and Wren asleep, and all of it impossibly quiet and solid and real. You're still shaking, she said quietly. So are you, I said. She pulled me up from the floor, and there was a moment of rearranged geography in the small room. And then I was beside her, and she held me with the patient care of someone who understands that a body that has been frightened needs time to believe it is safe. That safety is not the absence of danger, but the active presence of something else, and that you have to prove it to the nervous system slowly, repeatedly, before it stops waiting for the next wrong thing. I lay with my face against her neck and felt with the particular quality of certainty that has nothing to do with logic that this was the safest I had been in a very long time. I slept. Chapter 11. The Last Days. We didn't discuss logistics that night or the next day. A wordless agreement that after could wait until it arrived, and that what was present right now was real and sufficient and didn't require analysis. The final 4 days at the retreat had a different texture. Same studio, same meals, same Atlantic light, but the layer of pretending was simply gone, and its absence changed everything the way removing a film from glass changes the light that comes through it. Not brighter, but more direct. She was still the instructor. This mattered to both of us, without requiring discussion. In the studio, she was the same, precise, attentive, professionally generous with everyone. Her critiques as exact as they had always been. If anything, in those final days, she gave me harder and more useful feedback than she had in the first week combined, as if one barrier being cleared had cleared a general obstruction. But in the evenings, she sat beside me rather than across from me. And once, on the third to last night, she reached across and held my hand in the half-dark, without preamble, while Isadora told a complicated, digressive story involving a printmaker's conference, a mislabeled chemical shipment, and a Portuguese customs official whose role in the story remained philosophically unclear. Wren, on Isadora's other side, watched the hand-holding with the expression of someone who had believed in an outcome and was now receiving confirmation. Isadora noticed and chose with visible effort not to be insufferable about having been right. Clem saw it across the table, and her expression did something briefly complicated. An unguarded flash that resolved, with a grace I hadn't anticipated from her, into something like acknowledgement. She refilled her wine and turned back to Yuki and didn't make a scene, which I respected more than I expected to. Beatrice looked at the held hands and at our faces and said, with the bright directness of someone who simply tells the truth, "Oh, good," and returned to her bread. On my last full studio day, I painted the painting I had been trying to paint since I arrived. It came without a plan. I stood in front of a fresh canvas with a loaded brush and the usual small hesitation before the first mark. And then I started, and what emerged was not any of the exercises or studies I'd been working through for 12 days. It was something that had been building below the surface of all of them. 2 figures, 2 shapes built from color and gesture rather than precise form, and the space between them. The space was the subject, the charged distance, the almost touching that was not touching, but not touching either. I didn't make the figures face each other. I didn't make it readable as sentiment. I made it the way the woman in the Lisbon gallery had made her ordinary kitchen morning. Restraint, emotional weight in the space rather than the bodies, the light doing the work that declaration can't do. The weight fell where it needed to fall. In the lower left corner, I finally let it land without correction, without apology, without politeness. She stopped behind me at 2 in the afternoon. She was quiet for a long time. "Is this what I think it is?" she asked. "Almost certainly," I said. "It's the strongest thing you've done this week." "I know." She stood for another moment. Then her hands came to rest on my shoulders, not guiding, not correcting. Present. The warmth of her palms through my shirt, and her chin came to rest briefly against my hair, a gentle, private thing in the busy studio. "The lower left corner," she said. "Always," I said. She stood there a moment longer. Then she moved on, and I heard her stop behind Isadora and say something precise about Isadora's new canvas, and the afternoon continued. I stood at my own canvas for the rest of the session and understood, looking at it, that this was the first genuinely real thing I had made in a year. Not technically the best thing, not even objectively good, perhaps, but real, which is the only criterion that matters at the beginning of beginning again. Chapter 12. Edinburgh in February. They hung all the work on the last evening. Everything from Beatrice's bold and joyful and technically uncertain first oils to Clem's extraordinary mixed media piece that made everyone stop. Tomas gave the closing remarks, warm, specific, true about each person. Beatrice cried. The good kind, the kind that happens when you've been more moved than you planned. There was wine and the small honey cakes the house cook had made, and the room had the warmth of women who have worked hard together and arrived at the end of it at a genuine mutual regard. I stood in front of my painting with a glass and looked at it from the distance it needed. Mira came to stand beside me. "Tell me what you see," I said. She looked at it for a moment. 2 people, she said, still learning the distance between them. But the light in the space already knows. The light is already certain, even if the shapes are still working it out. The shapes know too, I said. Yes, she said. I think they do. She turned from the painting to me. In the gallery's good light, she was the same woman who had stood in the doorway on the first evening, except that now I could read her. The things she had been keeping behind the composure was visible now, resting at the surface where things live when they have stopped requiring to be hidden. What happens after? She asked. Seville is 2 hours from Dublin, I said. 2.5. That's nothing. That's a reason to have a reason. The corner of her mouth. I've been thinking, she said carefully, that I might try showing some work again. Somewhere small, somewhere I trust. Nothing announced. I looked at her. That's significant. I know. She was looking at the painting. I seem to have been reminded recently that hiding something honest is a particular kind of waste. What reminded you? She looked at me. You did, she said. You and the lower left corner. I put my hand on her arm, the lightest pressure. She covered it with hers. We stood in front of the painting while the room gathered warmly around us. Wren's voice in the near distance, Isadora and Clem apparently deep in the contentious technical debate they had both been working toward for 12 days and were clearly going to enjoy enormously. Beatrice showing Yuki something on her phone, both of them leaning together. Tomas laughing at something in the corner. Idris and Opalyn and Franny in a warm triangle near the last canvas. I need to tell you something, I said. Yes. When I arrived at this gate 12 days ago, I was genuinely Ash. Not metaphorically. Not just sad or tired or blocked. There was nothing in me that could have painted that canvas. I looked at the lower left corner, at the light that already knew. I don't know exactly what the retreat was supposed to do for me, but what it did was this. All of this. She squeezed my hand once, gently, without speaking. The burning, she said at last, quietly. And then the soil breathes, I said. She turned and kissed me there in the gallery room, our people around us and the paintings watching. A brief kiss, unself-conscious, the kiss of something that doesn't need to hide anymore. When she pulled back, her face was completely unguarded. No professional layering, no careful restraint, just herself, which was the most precise and quietly devastating thing I had encountered in 31 years. I leaned my head against her shoulder. She put her arm around me. Outside, the Atlantic was doing its patient work. The fennel fields were dark. And somewhere in the ash of the surrounding hills, the soil was already releasing its minerals, already beginning the long, slow work of feeding what came next. Edinburgh in February is beautiful in a specific way. Cold with texture, sea-edged, arriving with the smell of the firth and the particular pale northern light that comes off old stone. The studio on the close off the Royal Mile has north-facing skylights, which we both agreed the first time I walked in was the only kind that mattered. A small cast-iron radiator that produces serious warmth through no visible mechanism. A coffee pot that requires 19 unrushed minutes to produce anything drinkable, which I have accepted as a feature rather than a fault. Her new canvases are against the east wall, 8 of them in various stages. She hasn't promised them to anyone, hasn't announced anything, but they exist. They are in the world, which is itself a beginning, the beginning of a beginning, the pins and needles stage of something she has been working back toward for 6 years. I paint in the corner by the window. My own canvases, my own materials, my own ongoing project of relearning what I know about the lower left corner, which is no longer a problem and has become instead a signature. The place where, without planning, the most honest thing lands. She stops behind me in the late afternoon when the light has gone amber through the skylight. She doesn't speak for a while, just stands there. The warmth of her, the specific quality of her stillness that I know now as well as I know my own breath. Then she says, "You're doing it again." "I know," I say. "It's deliberate now." She laughs, a full laugh, the kind that starts in the chest and doesn't need permission. I put down my brush and turn around, and her face is the face I have been learning for months. All its particular honesty and the way it moves when she isn't performing anything for anyone. I put my paint-covered hands on her face, which she stopped objecting to somewhere around the 2nd month. "The lower left corner," she says, with a warmth that is entirely, completely unguarded. "Always," I say. And I mean it about painting. And I mean it about this. And I mean it about everything still to come, all the canvases unfinished, all the mornings we haven't had yet, all the light we haven't watched move across the skylight together. The ash is good for something. I was right about that.